Hello, thank you very much for the introduction and congratulations for the organizer for this event. I also have a presentation regarding the CFD scheme. It is based on the information that was available so far, but as Gabriel just mentioned, the government has just issued a press release just an hour ago, I think, whereby they announced that they approved the final legislation. Actually, this is in line with the calendar that they announced in the event organized last week. So I don't know exactly how the legislation looks like, but I expect that it is very much like the drafts published 2 weeks ago, especially because many of the principles of the scheme, or the main ones, were included in the decision of the Commission, so the Ministry has little flexibility in changing the principles that were approved by the European Commission without going back to get a new approval. So we can expect that what we'll see in the presentation is also in the final legislation package, but of course we can expect some surprises. Yes, so first of all, the Ministry will adopted the government decision which sets out the main principles of the mechanism, CFD mechanism, and based on this, there will be multiple schemes. There will be competitive schemes and also ad hoc schemes which will be awarded through direct negotiations. So far, the Ministry of Energy obtained the approval of the European Commission for one scheme, which is to have to address a total capacity of 5 giga. That eligible technologies are onshore wind and solar PV. The scheme is based on the temporary framework of crisis and transition. And due to this, it needs to be allocated in full by the end of 2025. That's why the Ministry has in mind to organize 2 auctions, one which will be launched probably these days for 2 giga, equally split between onshore wind and solar PV. And the second auction in 2025, 3 giga, also equally split between the 2 technologies. So just to give an overview of the scheme, the main authorities are the Ministry of Energy, which manages the scheme. NRA elaborates the secondary legislation, so we will expect in the next period secondary legislation adopted by NRA. OCOM will be the CFD counterparty, which will conclude the CFD agreements with the producers. TSO will manage the auction, will organize the auction, will manage the selection process, will validate the results. And the Romanian Competition Council managed the state aid clearing. What's important to mention about the funding of the scheme, at least for this one, because the mechanism itself may have also other funding sources, but this particular scheme that was adopted will be entirely financed by the Modernization Fund. This is actually an innovation of the Romanian authorities, because usually CFD schemes are financed through a levy paid by final consumers, same as, I don't know, green certificate scheme that we have. But it was the intention of the Romanian authorities to ease the pressure of the final consumers and to use instead the Modernization Fund. Of course, that the scheme will be financed also by the payments to be paid by producers in the cases where the reference price exceeds the strike price. There will be a levy payable by the end consumers, but not to finance the fund itself, but only to bear the cost for administrative cost of Transelectrica and OPCOM. So probably it's not going to be much. We don't yet have an estimation. I understand that it will depend on how many selected bidders will be, how many contracts will be concluded. This will influence the work to be done. The calendar that was announced by the Ministry in the event that they organized on the 25th of March, and which they seem to observe, is that this week they will publish the legislation. and as we saw, it was just adopted today. The investor will have 3 months to submit the offers. So until the week of 1st of July, during this period, there will be 2 rounds of clarifications. One a conference and another written Q&A session. So all the interested participants will be able to address all the inclarities during these 2 rounds. During the month of July, the offers will be opened. First, they will open the technical offers and notify the results based on a pass or fail test. And then for the bidders that were qualified, they will open the financial offer, and the CFD contracts are supposed to be signed end of August. The eligibility requirements are going to be included in the auction initiation order that we currently do not have, and we didn't have a draft published so far. But from the various documents that the ministry has published or the various information that they disclosed in the official events, we can expect the following main eligibility requirements. So first, it needs to be a new project. Repowering or extension of new existing projects will not be eligible. From the perspective of the capacity, at least for the auction to be done this year, the minimum capacity will be 5 megawatts, and the maximum capacity will be 250. Actually, it's going to be 25% of the total capacity in the auction per technology. So this means 250 for the auction this year. This is also a limit for per sponsor, per investor. In other words, an investor can participate with one project of 250 or can participate with multiple projects through different SPVs, which combined do not exceed 250. It is possible, however, to participate with part of the installed capacity of a project. So if you have a 300 megawatts project, you can participate in the auction with only 250, so part of its capacity, to the extent that a separate metering is installed. So it is allowed. As I said, the acceptable technologies are onshore wind and solar PV. If a project has a storage facility, because we heard a lot about the necessity of storage, however, the authorities decided that projects with storage are not eligible unless they install a separate meter. Same goes for hybrid project, onshore wind and solar PV, for example, because there are 2 separate auctions. The 2 parts of the project need to have separate meters to be eligible for the CFD scheme. In line with the state aid rules, you are not allowed to accumulate state aids. For example, a project which applied and got financing under the PNRR is not eligible. However, if you apply with part of the project capacity, in theory, you could apply for other state aid like modernization fund for the remaining capacity. As to the maturity, ATR is no longer a condition, but needs to be obtained in 6 months. To the extent that EPC agreements were signed, they need to be signed after July 2022. Otherwise, if they were signed before, the project is not eligible. And of course, the project needs not to be commissioned, but the commission needs to take place within 3 years from signing. I will pass very fast through this. We will see the exact information to be included in the offer. However, what we know so far is that the maximum strike price from which the auction starts cannot exceed 91 per megawatt hour for the solar auction and 93 for the wind auction. The COD, as I said, may not exceed 3 years from CFD signing. It is possible to exceed 3 years, but you will be penalized, and the CFD agreement will be decreased pro rata. A bid bond will be needed to participate in the auction in the value of 20,000 euro per megawatt of auction capacity. And in case there are tight bids, they will be differentiated based on, first, if the ATR is obtained, the larger projects will be prioritized, the earlier COD date prioritized, and the first to apply in the order. The key financial principles, I think that the main principles are already known very well. the CFD, the producer receives the difference between the strike price and the reference price, or pays. It's a bidirectional payment. What's important is that there is an indexation system, but it was changed based on what was previously announced, and the indexation is limited only if the consumer price index exceeds with at least 10% the previous value, which raises significant concerns as regards the actual applicability of this indexation mechanism. The reference price will be the monthly weighted average of the day-ahead market price for both day-ahead markets, both on OPCOM and BRME. And they will be calculated for the respective technology, taking into consideration the quantity of electricity produced and delivered into the grid by the producers qualified for the CFD scheme. It can be revised by an array both upwards and downwards, depending on whether there are concerns of overcompensation or undercompensation. What's very important is that the producer will not receive any CFD payments in negative price intervals. This is not something that was decided by the Romanian authorities. This was rather something that comes from the EU legislation. It seems that there will not be payments for positive imbalances, because there is this requirement, again, it's a new requirement that all the electricity to be generated, to be sold on the centralized market. This is again new, something new, because previously the Ministry of Energy intended to give liberty to the producer to sell the electricity as they wish, but they decided to limit the trading on the centralized market. But if it seems that if you are going to produce more than you actually sold and notified, you will not get CFD payments, although the version of the contract that they published, it's not written in this way, but according to the discussion we had with the Ministry of Energy, it seems that they are going to change it, and they are going to make it clear that no CFD payments are going to be made for positive imbalances. Also, something new that came this year, I understand from an array proposal, is that a profit sharing mechanism was inserted. Basically, the purpose is to pay the producer to pay half of the excess profit in case he decides to sell the electricity not on the day-ahead market, not on the spot market, but through bilateral agreement on the centralized market. So if the producer sells the electricity through bilateral contracts concluded on centralized market, they will need to pay to the CFD counterparty basically half of the difference between contract price and reference price, and there are three different cases that may occur. The idea behind it, as it was declared by the Ministry of Energy, was to encourage the bilateral trading. I don't know whether they will be able to do that. In the end, if there are losses, there are no similar provisions, so only the profit is shared, but not also the losses. And just to close, just to sum up some issues that I saw in the draft of the CFD agreement that was published so far. We don't know whether they will solve some of the issues here, but at least from my perspective as a lawyer, I think the biggest problem is that there is a provision in the contract for difference saying that if the CFD counterparty does not have liquidity in the fund, it has no liability against the producer to make the CFD payments that it owes. Not even delay penalties are due. So basically, until the Ministry of Energy transfers additional money in the CFD fund, the CFD counterparty has no liability. And I think this is one of the biggest problems, and raises a lot of bankability concerns regarding the scheme. Another problem is that the CFD counterparty may terminate for convenience at any time. This agreement, yes, there is a compensation and there is a formula for compensating the producer. However, I think this comes in contradiction with the very essence of the CFD scheme, because it's not a simple commercial agreement, it's a stated scheme that should be in place for 15 years. There are some change in law provisions. They are good ones. They protect the producer for legislative interventions. However, they are limited only in case the legislative changes are addressed only to the CFD beneficiaries. So, for example, if it's a legislative change that affects all the renewable producers, it will not protect the CFD beneficiaries, and it will not trigger the adjustment of the strike price. We already discussed about the problem deriving from the indexation rules. There are no excuse delay provisions, so if the producer is not able to reach COD within the timeline set out in the CFD agreement, the CFD agreement is terminated automatically, and there are no excuse delays. For example, in case Transelectrica does not finalize its investment, grid reinforcement works, and the connection to the grid is not achieved due to Transelectrica, for example, or the grid operator, there are no excuse